episode 103 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Now, we got a little bit more sleep last night, so we're perhaps not as chronically sleep deprived as we were 24 hours ago. We have to confess that we haven't watched every single one of the matches because that would literally involve being completely nocturnal, wouldn't it, Sid?
And we do have day jobs.
Exactly.
Sadly.
So, yeah, we're going to talk about a couple of the matches in a bit more detail, and especially, obviously, England v Australia, because that's the one that we actually watched every single ball of. And obviously, I had to because I was reporting on it for The Guardian. But let's start off with a couple of the other matches that have been going on over the last day and a half, Sid. So South Africa v Bangladesh, I'm going to kick off with that one. Bangladesh actually came kind of close to causing a bit of an upset in their first ever 50 over World Cup match, didn't they? So they reduced South Africa to 119 for 5 at one point and gave them a real scare. But then Cap and Tryon kind of led the way with a partnership and got them up to, I think it was 207. And then Bangladesh couldn't quite back it up with the bat. We know from having seen them in the 2018 and a little bit in the 2020 World Cups that they're kind of more of a bowling team. So it's perhaps no surprise that their batters weren't able to chase over 200. But yeah, that was a bit of a scare for South Africa first up, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a little bit. I mean, they obviously missed Lizelle Lee up top. They've been quite lucky, actually. They've got the easiest games up front. They're the games that Lizelle Lee is missing. If you're not aware of what's gone on, Lizelle Lee stayed in South Africa a little bit longer to be there for the birth of her baby. Her partner gave birth about a week and a half ago, I believe. So she's had to go in late. She's in quarantine late, so she'll be available from next week.
Okay.
So yeah, and they also missed
Congratulations.
of course. Welcome to a world of getting no sleep for the next 18 years. Anyway, I digress. Gosh, where was I? I've completely lost my train of thought.
Sorry, Sid.
That's okay.
You were talking about the recovery with the bat, I think.
Yeah, so they missed Lizelle Lee at the top of the order. I think they also missed Donovan Nikok a little bit there. I think that although she's not like a big run scorer, she brings in that bit of confidence, sort of coming in at 5 or something, or even 6, that people don't need to worry so much because she's always there backing them up. And it means that also Cap can bat one place lower, and it kind of pushes their batting order later and later. But we've seen that they've got players capable of scoring runs even quite far down the order, and of course they remain really a bowling team, so the best bowling team in the world. And so if they can get over 200, they're probably going to defend it, especially against the smaller sides. But a good start for South Africa overall. Yeah,
exciting. And then most recently we've had India v Pakistan. Do you want to give us the lowdown on that one, Sid, which was obviously hotly anticipated around the world because of this ongoing kind of slightly political rivalry?
Yeah, so, there was a very early wicket. Shafali Verma got a duck, but then India recovered to 96 for 1. But then it so nearly went horrendously wrong for India. They lost 5 for 18. They ended up 114 for 6. And they really did look to be in a lot of trouble at that point. I mean, you definitely have backed Pakistan to be able to chase 120 or so. But Sneh Rana and Pooja Vastrika kind of pulled it back for them. Both played very well. We've only seen brief highlights of that at this stage, but they looked to have played very well, and they got to a position where they ended up on 244, and that was just far too much for Pakistan. So I watched the Pakistan batting innings, and they just never looked like a side that had any self-belief that they were going to be able to chase 250 in a World Cup match, and they were right. So I mean, they're a little bit worrying for India, perhaps, that their batting collapsed like that. But on the other hand, they got through it, and if this was their poor performance of the World Cup, they got through it, and there's still everything to play for, and at the end of the day, they still got a win on the board. Pooja Vastrika, particularly is impressing everybody, and I think a little bit of a Catherine Brunt about her, a little bit of that sort of fighting spirit, and the kind of player that's obviously primarily a bowler and is, going to be an aggressive bowler and an important bowler, a bowler that can take wickets, but will also, once every few innings will do something impressive enough with the bat that remains significant. I don't quite see, I might be wrong about this, but I don't quite see her becoming, a sort of proper top order batter, but I definitely see her as someone that, over the next 15 years is going to, make maybe 10, 12 half centuries coming in at 7 or 8. So she's looking really good. And Snow Rana, of course, who we saw last summer, had one particularly impressive game against England, didn't she?
Yeah, in the test at Bristol, she basically saved it for them. It was an amazing performance. So no surprise to see her kind of pulling it off with the bat.
Yeah. So again, if India got through it, that's the important thing from their perspective, I think, in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I think their batting woes are a bit of a concern because obviously they're going to be facing some much stiffer opposition than Pakistan later in the group stages. And I think it's a bit of a concern that Mitali and Harmanpreet both failed again. Harmanpreet did make that 100, I think it was, in one of the warm-up matches, but if she can't turn it on in an actual real-life match situation, then that's a bit concerning. So that does worry me, and obviously there's ongoing discussion about Shafali Verma, and you said to me this morning, well, this time last year she hadn't even played an ODI, and that's true, but it just felt like they batted more convincingly, that the opening pair batted more convincingly against New Zealand, and of course it was a different opening pair because Smriti obviously wasn't available for some of those matches against New Zealand, so Shafali was opening the batting, but she had a different opening partner, Meghna, and you just feel that they're missing some of that impetus perhaps at the top of the order. So a little bit of a concern for India with the bat going forward after that match.
Yeah, but I think that ultimately, India, this was just a match they needed to win, and they got the job done.
Okay. Talking of getting the job done, let's talk about the biggest upset of the tournament so far, which also happened to be the opening game, New Zealand v West Indies. Now, we did watch a fair bit of that one, and particularly we were there at the end when it got quite exciting. So first up, big congratulations to Hailey Matthews, who scored a century. Really good performance from her. I was asleep during her innings, I must confess, but have watched some of the highlights and looked like a really good innings from her. And then that got West Indies to 259, so New Zealand had to chase 260. So you'd think that kind of anything above 250 in women's ODIs is sort of, that's a decent effort, and it was going to take something from New Zealand to chase it, but you kind of would go, well, given the way that they batted in that warm-up against Australia, you'd back them to do so. And they didn't quite manage to get over the line, despite magnificent century from Sophie Devine, who was really the one holding it together as the middle order did a little bit of a kind of more traditional New Zealand thing and had a little bit of a collapse. And then right at the end, in that penultimate over, when Katie Martin hit those 2 fours off the last 2 balls of the 49th over, it was like, okay, well, they've only got to make 6 in the final over, and they should do that because it's a runner ball and you would back most sides to do that on most days. And then the most interesting thing that I think that has happened so far this World Cup happened, which is that so let's give a hypothetical scenario, Sid. You've got 1 over left, you've got to defend 6 runs, it's going to be a big ask, you're the bowling captain, and one of your players comes up to you and says, oh, Skip, I think I want to bowl this last over. I've bowled like 10 overs in the last 3 years of international cricket. I've got an ongoing really bad shoulder injury that's keeping me from bowling. I've not bowled today because we all agreed before this match that I wasn't going to bowl in the World Cup. But by the way, I want to bowl this 50th over. What would you say to her, Sid?
Well, right.
You'd probably...
I'd definitely say yes.
You'd probably
be a brilliant idea.
You'd probably be telling her to push off and stop being such an idiot, wouldn't you? You'd be saying, no, I'm going to give the ball to somebody who's actually bowled recently and doesn't have an injury concern, because the worst thing that could happen is, she bowls 3 balls and does her shoulder in and then can't finish it off and somebody else has to pick it up. I mean, all kinds of things could have gone wrong. But there you go.
Instead, all kinds of things went right.
Yeah, they absolutely did. Dottin ended up taking 3 wickets, but obviously the crucial one was that second ball where she just bowled the perfect Yorker to Katie Martin. And that kind of did for New Zealand, really. At that point, it was going to be quite difficult to come back from. So, yeah, good for her, good for Dottin, and there's some quite interesting stuff afterwards where basically apparently Stephanie Taylor was just basically shrugged and was just like, okay, well if you're so keen to do it, then here you go, and I'm washing my hands of it, and you're going to have to explain it to Courtney Walsh, the coach, after the match if it doesn't go to plan. And obviously it did go to plan, and Dottin's the hero. So yeah, well done her, and it's actually, it's a shame for New Zealand in a way, but what a brilliant start to the World Cup. It's really got everyone talking, hasn't it, Sid?
Yeah, it has. I want to talk a little bit about Hailey Matthews, actually, because obviously, she's the classic burst onto the scene player, and she played the innings of her life, age like 16, in the 2020 World Cup final, or the World 2020 final, as it then was called, in 2016. And it must be weird to at 16 to have kind of almost know that you're never going to match that again, and she probably won't, because that was just like a remarkable day. And how many times are you going to be player of the match in a World Cup final? But over the next few years, she played a lot in the T20 league. So she played in WBBL and in the KSL, and she was mostly selected on the grounds of those performances, but actually she was mostly a bowling player in those tournaments. And if you looked at her stats, like with her name blanked out, you looked at those numbers that she produced in WBBL, KSL, etc., you'd go, this is a bowler. This is a bowler who bats a bit. This is this might be Dipti Sharma, for example, someone like that. And she never quite lived up to that promise with the bat. What we saw in this match here was actually quite a different batter. It wasn't the sort of carefree 16-year-old with no worries on her shoulders. It was a much more mature innings. She gave up very little chances, and it was a very different kind of. It was a grown-up innings, and if that's the kind of cricket she's going to be playing for the West Indies, over the next sort of 10 years of her career, and bear in mind she's still got 10 years of her career left, probably into sort of 32, 33, and she's going to be such a great player over the longer term. So I think a really important innings from the perspective of her career.
And we talked in the last episode of the broadcast that West Indies could be playing a crucial role in terms of kind of maybe preventing one of the sort of top 5 sides, as we considered them, from qualifying. But if you're Courtney Walsh right now, wouldn't you be sat there thinking, well, what's to stop my team going on and qualifying for the semi-finals? Yeah,
definitely. If you're a West Indian fan, you've won one of those important games. You probably hope to beat Bangladesh and Pakistan, so that gives you 3 games. If you can win a 4th game, you're definitely into the mix. If you're a West Indies fan or a West Indies player or the West Indies coach even, you've definitely got some confidence you can do that. If you're asking me, should you put money on it, I'd still say probably not.
Okay.
But go for it, West Indies.
Cool, great, okay. And now this is the big one from our perspective, England v Australia. It was a nail biter, wasn't it, Sid, in the end?
Yeah, some 2 great performances, I think. And England really, kind of threw off the Ashes, to be honest. If you just look at the result, obviously England lost again. You go, well, they've lost 7 ODIs in a row against Australia. They haven't beaten Australia in an ODI since like 2018. As Hypercourse pointed out on Twitter, who has?
Yeah.
Only 2 other teams have done in that time. Or rather, only two teams have not lost. I think Australia have lost 1 game and drawn 1 game in that time. But England really showed that they can compete with Australia in a way that they didn't do in the Ashes. So they really subsided at the end of the Ashes, and we're nowhere near them. Whereas here, they got really close, and that's what's so important for England. This wouldn't have been a game that England were targeting. England would have been aware that this was a game that they were probably going to lose. But they really made a go of it. And given that Australia made that huge score, which didn't look like they were going to make, did it, Raf?
No.
I mean, on 40 overs, what did you say to me?
I said they're never going to get over 300 because that's what all the commentators were saying. And I said, well, they need to go at 10 and over to do that. And they're not going to do that on the evidence of so far. But obviously, I think that a few people have said that the conditions for batting got slightly easier towards the back end of the innings. But there was definitely a sense in which what Australia did so well was that Haynes and Nanning, after Healy got out early, what Haynes and Nanning did was just to dig in. And it wasn't easy going, and they did really struggle for runs, but they didn't, and they offered up a few half chances. There were some balls that dropped just short in front of fielders, and there were, a couple of half run out chances, and England bowled pretty well at them, but couldn't take either of their wickets, and that was really important, because if you get to that stage in the game, they got to sort of 30 overs in and they were 1 wicket down, 9 wickets in hand. That's really important, because it does allow you then to really go on and push on, and after they both got their half centuries, Haynes and Lanning then were able to, or did feel able at that point, to take a few more risks because of having those wickets in hand. And then finally that last 10 overs was the most productive 10 over phase of the game for them.
They did go at 10 and over, and Rachel Haynes really let go after she got her century. She had a bit of nervous 90s. She slowed down a lot in the 90s, but then she just went whack, 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 and was hitting at 200 for the last sort of 30 runs of her innings. Came off 14 balls or something. And
I think that's one of the issues with Australia is that even if you do kind of manage to restrict their scoring rate, whenever the ball wasn't being bowled, the camera kept panning to the Australian dugout, and you saw who had their pads on to come in next, and it was Elise Perry and Beth Mooney, and you go, oh well, hang on, even if we do take a wicket or two here, then we're still absolutely screwed, aren't we? Then obviously
and if
after
you get Perry
that,
and Mooney out, you've got McGrath to come in.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got wickets in hand, and you've also got pretty freaking good wickets in hand, haven't you? So that's Australia for you. Is that an issue for England, do you think, Sid? Because we've talked before about how they, at some kind of crucial points over the last year or so, have really struggled to take wickets as a bowling unit.
It definitely has been an ongoing problem for England, but I just think that Australia were just slightly too good, and I think that you've really got to take the positives from this match for England. So I wrote a piece for CRICKETher yesterday, which talked about that and talked about the idea that that this is really a very positive outcome for England, and I think that's the way that we want to look at it. So Australia made an absolutely enormous total, and yes, England didn't take wickets, but they didn't bowl badly. I mean, you can't point to any of those England bowlers and go, this one bowled badly or that one bowled badly. There were a few wides, but I think that overall it was a good performance with the ball, and then England matched it with the bat, which is what they'd failed to do in the Ashes, really, wasn't it? I mean, apart from that final innings of the Test, England hadn't really gone for it, but they went out there like a team that felt that they could do it. Obviously lost the early wicket of Lauren Winfield, but Heather Knight came out and was straight away, played positively. Tammy Beaumont was playing more positively than she has for quite a while, so certainly over the winter, over the Ashes tour. So they came really close. I mean, it's the second highest total ever made in the second innings of a women's ODI. It would have been the highest successful chase if they'd made it. They fell just short, but what they've shown is that they can mix it with the Australians, and hopefully it's given them some of their self-belief back. And I think that on that performance yesterday, they'd have beaten any other side in the tournament.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that we are going to see those kind of records broken this tournament, aren't we? A lot of them are very outdated from where we've come from in 2017 to now, in terms of this is the highest World Cup thing, this is the highest individual total in a World Cup. All of those kind of records are just going to be repeatedly smashed because it's the era of professionalisation.
Yeah, and we've got sort of serious professionalisation now. It's really interesting listening to Nasser Hussain on commentary, because clearly what was happening on commentary was that Nasser Hussain was getting stuff in his ear from the producers going, well, this is a record, that's a record, and Nasser Hussain was going, okay, this is a record, but of course, basically, everyone's professional now, whereas almost everyone wasn't professional 4 years ago. So it doesn't really, not that it doesn't count, but Nasser did keep feeling he needed to emphasise that those records in some ways weren't comparable, because you were talking about a different era, even in 2017.
Of course, So, and I think that's important. But, also there was that thing, in the innings break, I said to you, England not going to get anywhere near 300. And I'll be honest, because that was how they were batting at the back end of the Ashes. And of course they all said, oh, well, we've parked that and we've put that behind us. But that's what you say, because you have to put on a good face. But they actually walked the talk. They really did. They really came out and batted like they thought they could chase it down, and they got really close. So, it was great from them. And as you say, lots of positives for England. But I do feel still slightly concerned about the bowling lineup. They obviously think that this is their best bowling lineup, and they've obviously got this strategy of now they think that against the best sides they have to play 7 batters. I don't think that they're going to change that, but I think that maybe there's a case for changing it and a case for having another spinner or even a left arm seamer or just somebody who bowls slightly differently, because then you have a bit more variety.
Yeah, as I wrote in my piece, it would be harsh to drop anybody, but on the other hand, a little bit more variety might be useful. So I guess the one sort of negative that remains for England is that although this is the game against Australia and somebody had to play Australia first, it does mean that another loss and things start to get a little bit squeaky. Now, the maths says that it's definitely possible to lose 3 games and still qualify for the semi-finals. So there are a reasonable number of scenarios where that's possible. But the truth is that if you lose 3 games, then the odds are starting to stack up against you, and you probably need lots of other results to go your way. So that means that if England lose another game, then they really are in quite squeaky territory. So what we're saying is that if they want to be certain of semi-final qualification, they really need to win all their remaining games now. Lose one more game, and then the last games then become really squeaky, because then they become virtual quarterfinals.
And that does put quite a lot of pressure on the side, doesn't it?
It does, but I think that England can live up to that. And
That's what they did in 2017. That's exactly what they did.
This was, a positive performance. And I guess, well, will we be looking back in 4 weeks' time, going that this was a warm up for the semi-final, for the semi-final or the final, and England can look back at this and go, look, we can match Australia.
We competed with them.
We can do this.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of that mathematical qualification, obviously the other team who will be really disappointed to have lost their first match is New Zealand. How concerned should they be about qualification?
Yeah,
because obviously the home side, and there's pressure on them as well, isn't there?
Yeah, they're going to have to be able to be a bit more concerned just because they've still got to play Australia.
Exactly.
So
England.
we're all talking as if the Australia games are almost a given for Australia, and obviously they're not. Australia could come out. You can bowl Australia out. Definitely, it's India have beaten them recently.
Yeah.
But the truth is that you probably want to kind of bank the Australia game as a loss.
Yeah.
That means that New Zealand are really now in a situation where they desperately need to beat England and beat South Africa. So it's tough for them. But a lot could still happen. And of course, the other big factor in this World Cup could turn out to be rain. That if games get rained off, it's going to very much depend upon which games get rained off. So if people get their game against Australia rained off, for example, New Zealand Australia gets rained off.
Yeah, happy days. You bag the point, don't you?
Yeah, you bagged the point against Australia that you didn't think you were going to get. Yeah. So rain.
New Zealand in 2017 did get a bit screwed over by the rain.
Yeah.
Because their match against South Africa got rained off at Derby. I remember sitting there in the rain and it was very miserable. And so they only got 1 point, and they would have obviously been hoping for 2 points from that. So it is
which
the
would
rain
have made all the difference.
Yeah. So the rain karma should be in New Zealand's favour this time around. Just saying. Well. Okay, shall we wrap up there, Sid?
Yeah.
Great. We're looking forward to some more sleepless nights this week. England's next match, obviously, it's Tuesday evening our time, but Wednesday in New Zealand against West Indies. So that'll be an interesting one. And we will see you this time next week. Bye for now.
Bye.